right, so God gave all of you a mother and a father. There's nobody on earth who doesn't have a mother and a father. And he chose your parents specifically for you. There are no coincidences. In your life, you may think that something is luck or just happens, but no, there are no coincidences. God chose your parents for you. He chose your siblings. He chose what religion you would be born into. And he watches over you because he is primarily your father. He is your first father. God gave you a mother and a father. You call them, the society refers to them as your biological parents because they're the ones who gave you life. And sometimes you lose them. They die. And in that case, you may have an adopted parents or guardians. You also have another set of parents. They're called your godparents. They were given to you at baptism. And the church recognizes your godparents as actual parents. They have a spiritual relationship with you. And the church recognizes that spiritual relationship in her laws and what they can do for you and what they should do for you. If your parents fail in their spiritual duties toward you, it is the duty of your godparents to step in and take over your spiritual education. It's a tremendous responsibility. If you're ever asked to be a godparent, think about it very carefully. And then take your responsibility very seriously. And I told you at another time in another lesson that parents love their children, but they love them all equally. But they don't love them all the same. Now that sounds like a contradiction, but it's not. Love is an infinite thing. And your parents love you to the fullest amount of which you are capable of their love. They give you as much as you are capable of sustaining. But they don't love you the same. Each child is different. Each child has a different personality. Each child has a different set of emotions, a different set of talents, and parents need to work with their children depending upon those emotional needs, those talents, that personality. So one child might like to be cuddled and kissed, and another one can't stand it. And the parent acts accordingly. One child may have certain needs, emotional needs, or a disability or health issues where the parent may need to spend more time with them. That doesn't mean that they love the other children less or that they love that child more. That child just requires more of them. And parents give what each child needs. And each child needs something different. So you might, debate among yourselves, who's mom's favorite or who's dad's favorite. But parents don't really have favorites. They love all of their children to the amount that child is capable of receiving that love. They don't hold anything back. That's one of the beauties of parenthood. The first thing that your parents did was they gave you life. In that, they were imitating God. You received life really from Almighty God through your parents. Your parents gave you your body, but only God could give you your soul. He worked with them. It was a joint effort. And life, the life that you received was as a result of love, the love of your parents toward each other. God worked it out in a very special way that he deigned that human love of a husband and a wife together would bring forth the fruit that is the child. It's an imitation of his own fatherhood. He gave us life. Why did he do it? Because he wanted to share with us. The love that he had was so great, so overwhelming isn't the right word, but it was so immense that he needed to share it. He wanted to share it. And that is what happens between a husband and a wife. The love that they have for each other is so overwhelming that it consumes them in such a way that they also need to bring forth life. And they accept parenthood. They know what is going to come from parenthood. They know it's going to bring sacrifices. Just as God knew when he created us, it would bring sacrifice. So it's no different. The parenthood of your parents, your human biological or adopted parents or foster parents or whichever parents are taking care of you, is a direct reflection of the parenthood of God, God the Father. And so, what does a parent do? What are their obligations to you? First of all, your parents need to take care of your body. They have to provide shelter for you, food for you. They have to make sure that you're protected from harm. And that's exactly what God does for you. And then there's your spiritual welfare. And that is even more important than your bodily welfare. Taking care of your soul is the most important job that your parents have. One day, they are going to stand before Almighty God, and they have to account for you. For each of their children, they have to make an account. That's a terrible thing. So if your parents aren't, you may think that your parents are being overprotective or tyrannical or domineering or whatever when they say you can't associate with this person or that person, or you have to be in at a certain time or whatever. But they are actually doing their duty, which one day they will have to account to God for. And one day when you're married and you have children, you're going to be in the same boat. So one of the things that your parents have to do is they have to make sure that you're not needlessly exposed to harm, especially things that will harm you spiritually. And so that's why your parents have to watch over who you associate with. They have to safeguard you from temptations. Temptations are going to come. It's just what we talked about before. Temptations are going to come. But they have to keep you from needless temptations because children are not strong enough yet to face those kind of temptations. And so the ones that your parents can help you avoid, so much the better. You'll be exposed to temptations. They can't keep you from everything. But the ones that they see on the horizon and they steer you away from, that's a duty and obligation they have. Because your children are weak. Until you've had experience in the world, you need their protection in that way. Though you may think that you're totally capable of handling anything, teenagers generally do feel that way. Another job of your parents is that they are your first educators. You are supposed, long before you get to school, your parents have already started to teach you. And hopefully they started to teach you on a spiritual level as well, taught you your prayers, taught you who God is, who the Blessed Mother is, taught you respect, taught you to obey. They are the first educators. And they also have an obligation to choose where you will be educated, and to pull you out of a school if they find that it is not doing what it's supposed to do, if it's undermining your spiritual life, then they need to pull you out of it. That's why we have so many parents homeschooling now, because the schools have, even Catholic schools, a lot of them have lost their true function. And a lot of schools actually ruin the work that the parents do at home. Another thing is that part of your parents' job as an educator and your educator is to teach you by example. Parents should pray with their children. They can't just teach you the prayers and not expect you to do it on your own. They need to, and I'm sure all of yours do, pray with you. They need to give you an example of going to Mass on Sunday. A child that doesn't see their parents going to Mass on Sunday will very quickly stop going. A child that doesn't see his parents saying prayers will stop praying. We follow the example of our parents, whether we're aware of it or not. We learn from them. I don't know if I ever told you the story about our dog in the convent. Probably not. Well, we had Rottweilers, and my job when I was a novice was taking care of the dogs, and I, trained them. I became a pretty good dog trainer. I could get the dogs to do just about anything. Anyway, we had a big female Rottweiler, and she considered herself a house dog and didn't like going outside. And so to get her to go outside, I would open the furnace room door, and she knew that she was supposed to go out, and she wouldn't go. And I would start to count. I go, 1, 2. By the time I got to 3, she would run down the hall and out the door, because she knew that if she wasn't out the door by 3, that I would take off my belt and go down there and, hit her a few times. So she would wait until I got to past 2, and then she'd make beeline for the door. Well, my mother one time was visiting the convent, was standing behind the furnace room door, because I opened the door and it blocks the hallway. So she was in the hall behind the door, and I started to count. And as soon as the dog was out, I could hear my mother laughing, because when we were kids, you did something. My mother wore, it was a leather belt. It was about a 3/4 of an inch wide. It was a cowboy belt. When kids had these holsters, and I don't think it was really leather. It was mostly vinyl or something. And it came off a pair of, the holsters. It was the belt that held the holsters for the guns. Davy Crockett was big back then, and so was cowboy movies and all that sort of thing. Anyway, we had stopped playing with the guns, but she took the belt. She would wear it. And when we didn't do something we were told to do, and we knew we were going to get punished, we would run. And my mother wouldn't chase us. She would just start counting. And if we better be back before she got to 3, or she would use the belt. So when she heard me counting, she knew exactly. She said, "Is that all you ever learned from me?" We learn from our parents. We pick things up like that. Parents, you will, when you have children of your own, you will do the same thing to them that your parents did to you, because that's how you learned, and that's what you will pass along. And we also pass along bad things. Children of alcoholics tend to be alcoholics. Children of abusers, wife abusers, tend to abuse their wives. We learn from our parents, good and bad, by their example. No father ever tells his kid, you're supposed to beat your wife. They see their mom getting beaten. And when they grow up and have a wife of their own, they think, well, that's the way you're supposed to keep your wife in line. So even though your parents may be setting a good example for you in the home, as I say, they have to be careful about what you do outside the home. They're still responsible for you. So they have to be careful of who your companions are. And again, they're not being tyrants. They're doing what they're supposed to do. And they can't always explain to you why they do what they do. First of all, when you're very little, you won't understand. And when you're a teenager, sometimes it's not good for them at that point to explain to you why they're doing what they're doing. You may still not understand their reasons. You might argue with them about it, but you won't see it. When you're a little bit older, you will. Parents have reasons for what they do and why they do it. If you can always ask, but if they don't choose to explain their reasons to you, just accept it, that they know what they're doing, that they have a reason for it. Maybe they know something about that person that you don't know, and they can't tell you because that would be the sin of detraction. You just have to trust them. And you should trust your parents. Remember, they love you and they only have your good at heart. So, and you also have to understand that they have experience that you don't have. I know teenagers think that they know everything, but they don't. Mark Twain made the comment one time that he thought his father learned a lot from the time that Twain was 12 until he was 20. It wasn't the father that was learning, it was the kid. You think you know it all, and then all of this, you find out later that you really didn't know anything. So, it's not for you to question them. And if you do feel the need to question something that they tell you to do, you should do it respectfully. Don't argue with them about it. You could all ask politely, well, why can't I associate with Sally? Well, what's wrong with Joey? And if they can't tell you, they will. But if they choose not to tell you, then you just have to accept it. And you have to obey. You have to obey. In situations like that are serious, if you disobey, you would be committing a mortal sin. In most situations, it's not a serious matter. So it would be a venial sin, or in some cases, no sin at all. If your parents suggest something to you, it's a suggestion, you don't have to obey. You would be smart and intelligent to obey, but it wouldn't be sinful if you didn't. But if they told you to do something and it wasn't serious, it would be a venial sin. But if it was a serious matter, and that means a matter that would cause either harm, serious harm, or sin, in your case, and again, associating with somebody, that they consider an occasion of sin that would be sinful, that would be a serious matter, and that would be a mortal sin. Parents need to correct the faults of their children. Nobody wants a kid who's a spoiled brat. So they have to, from the time that you were little, work on you to teach you how to be obedient and respectful. They must teach their children how to obey, and they should oblige you to do certain chores at home. One of the things that you have to learn is to live in the world, so you need to learn how to do chores at home. You should be responsible for things. If they ask you to be in at a certain hour, you should be there. If they tell you have to report when you get to so-and-so's house, you have to call them. You need to call them. They're doing their duty. You should be respectful to the members of your family, not just your parents, your grandparents, your aunts and uncles. and other people outside your house, and they need to teach you to be respectful. I remember Father did a whole sermon on that on one Sunday not so long ago. And also they need to help teach you to be helpful at home and to share. If you have siblings, you need to share with your siblings. And they also need to learn to respect what is yours. You know, you just don't go in and take something and borrow it without asking. Or go through your brother's or sister's drawers looking for an article of clothing that you want to wear or whatever. You need to respect their privacy, their rooms, their things. But by the same token, you all need to share with one another. At some point in your life, you're going to reach that stage where you want to, what are you going to do with your life? Whether you're going to whether you're going to get married or whether you're going to go to religious life. You should ask your parents advice. But there's two situations in which you do not have to obey your parents. One is when your parents ask you to do something that is sinful. And I can't imagine any of your parents doing that. But there are parents who do ask their children to do things that are sinful. In that case, you do not have to obey them. The second time when you do not have to obey them is in the matter of your vocation. That is between you and Almighty God. They can advise, but they may not either force you in one direction or forbid you from it. They cannot tell you who you have to marry. They cannot forbid you to become a religious or go to the seminary. They cannot push you toward the seminary or the religious life either. They can advise you. They can give you their opinion on the matter, but ultimately, you are the one who will be responsible before Almighty God for that. A marriage that I remember a case, it was in Baltimore, a very rich family, Catholic family. The girl was in love with a young man, but her parents didn't approve of him. They wanted her to marry someone of their same social standing. And the girl didn't want to do that. And the mother told her daughter that if she didn't marry the person that they had chosen for her, that the mother would commit suicide. And the girl did marry the choice of her parents. Later, that marriage was annulled because she had been forced into the marriage. And she did marry the guy that she really wanted to marry in the first place. You can't, they can advise, but the choice is ultimately yours. Because in those cases, in the case of religious life, you will be taking vows. In the case of a marriage, you will be taking vows. Those are promises made to Almighty God between you and Him and another person in the case of marriage. So you can't be forced. So everything that your parents do for you, as I said, God also does. So these are the things that your parents, these are the obligations of your parents. And I'm copying this book. Don't expect it to be up on the website this week. If it is, it'll be by the end of the week. I'm more than halfway through it. And I'll be putting this up there for parents, not for the teenagers, but for the parents. It's called Popular Instructions to Parents on the Bringing Up of Children. And this was published in 1897, and the author is Monsignor Ferial Girardi, he's a redemptorist, and he gives excellent information on how parents, the role of parents, and how the necessary virtues and things that they need to bring up their children properly. It's a book written for parents, not written for the children. When you're old enough, then you can read it. If you want to read it, then maybe you might understand some of the things that your parents have to put up with as far as, you're concerned. But it's really for parents. So we've talked about what parents' duties are toward you. What are your duties toward your parents under the fourth commandment? You have to love them, honor them, and respect them. And that also. So you owe them this because they stand in the place of God. And you owe them this because they are your greatest benefactor. They gave you life. Without them, you wouldn't be living. You owe it to them. You owe them love, honor, and respect. You honor your parents by giving them love and obedience. You show love for your parents by helping them and by praying for them daily. A day should not pass by that you do not say a prayer for your parents, whether living or dead. You need to pray for your parents. You owe it to them. You have an obligation. You reverence your parents by showing them respect because they hold God's place in your life. And now this is the part that gets a little sticky as far as you're concerned, because I know you're not going to like what you're going to hear. You have to accept their corrections willingly. That means don't talk back. When they correct you, accept it. You did something wrong. And if you're trying to excuse yourself or talk back to, that's pride talking. You did it, accept it. Say you're sorry. Don't do it again. You can't, and you shouldn't excuse or try to hide your faults from them. They need to know what you've done. They're not there to stand over you and constantly punish you. They're there to try and help you. So they need to know when you need help. What are your faults? Do you lie constantly? Or you are a careful liar? You lie when you know you won't get caught. And you need to always speak to them politely. You don't talk back to your parents. You don't yell at them, I hope. You should obey them and do just everything that you're told to do. As soon as you're told, without an excuse and without complaint. Even though it's something you don't want to do. Now, if it's something you think that should be done differently, or there's a reason why you think it shouldn't be done now, you can explain that politely. For example, maybe your dad says he wants you to mow the lawn, and you've got a basketball game, and you say to your dad, "Dad, I can't mow the lawn this afternoon, I have a basketball game, but I'll mow it tomorrow." I mean, there would be, not mowing the lawn that day would not be disobedience because you are going to mow the lawn. And if your father is agreeable with that, fine. But you politely explain the situation. And if your dad says, "No, it has to be done today, you can go play basketball after it's done," then you do it. Besides parents, we have to show honor and respect and obey other superiors. Next time I'm going to be talking about civil authority and church authority, but today we're just talking about parents. But you also have certain obligations to other authorities, like civil authorities and church authorities. And again, guardians, they stand in the place of parents. And when you're in school, your teachers stand in the place of your parents, and they're entitled to the same respect, and honor, and obedience that you would give to your parents. So what are you forbidden? That's what you have to do. What are you forbidden? Children fail in love for their parents if they hate them. Now, I know that's not an issue with you right now. It may happen in your life. It may happen in your life. Something happens, some argument that you have with your parents that causes a rift that you come to dislike them intensely and maybe hate them. You're not allowed to hate anyone, and you certainly should never hate your parents. Maybe you will come to disagree with them. I know I prayed very hard one time that I would never hate my father. This happened after he and my mother became divorced. I prayed very hard not to hate him, and I never did hate him. But I had to pray not to hate him because I knew what he had done to my mother. I hope you are never in a situation like that. But do pray for them. You have to love your parents. Regardless of what they do, they can be evil sometimes. They can commit evil. They're human beings. You have to hate the sin and love the sinner.
So you can hate what they did, but not hate them.
Exactly. You hate what they did, but you continue to love them. And you continue to pray for them so that they don't do that anymore, that they become holier. You can make great sacrifices for them. Children offend against reverence due parents when they talk back to them, when they refuse to accept the corrections, or they treat them with a lack of respect, and worst of all, if you should strike them, if you should hit your parents. Now, it's not an issue right now, but when you get to be a big guy, and, maybe you have a bad temper, watch out. Children offend against obedience due to parents when they refuse or neglect to do what they're told to do. You don't do your chores. So you're supposed to do your homework or whatever. You neglect to do it. Is it a sin? It's not going to be a mortal sin. It could be a venial sin depending upon how serious it is, what you were told to do. Children frequently disobey their parents by neglecting studies, home duties, associating with forbidden companions, and again, now that could be a mortal sin.
Depending on how evil they are or bad.
If your parents forbid you to associate with them, then your associating with them would be a mortal sin because your parents have a reason and they feel that person is an occasion of sin to you or could cause sin, and therefore it is a serious matter. And if you associate with them voluntarily, in other words, you're going to meet them. Let's say that you go to the same school, you're going to meet them, you can talk to them in the hallway, but you don't go out with them and to places, you don't associate with them outside of the normal, day-to-day meetings that you have at school or clubs or whatever you belong to. You don't associate with them if your parents have forbidden it. And therefore, in doing that, it would be a mortal sin. saying hello to them in school, stopping in the hallway and talking to them, not a problem. But if you arrange to meet them sometime without your parents knowing about it, yes. Pouting, stubbornness are faults against obedience. Again, they're faults. They're probably not even in the sinful range, but they're faults, and they can lead to, most of our faults tend to lead us toward venial sin, and venial sin weakens us and causes mortal sin. So you do realize that there are no amount of venial sins that can add up to a mortal sin. Mortal sin is mortal sin. Venial sin is venial sin. You can't, for example, lie 50 times and now 50 lies makes one mortal sin. No, it does. This spiritual math doesn't work that way. Again, a mortal sin is something you deliberately do, and a serious matter, and you choose to do it.
Like, say you're like afraid, then you're just like lying, like that's venial sin.
Say you're what?
Like afraid or something, and you lie. Like, is that a venial or a mortal?
That would be a venial sin. Yeah. The ones that people like to call white lies, those are venial sins.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, there is no such thing as a white lie. A lie is a lie. Disobedience to parents in important matters is a mortal sin. If it's an important matter, let's say you were told to stay home and not go out and to watch your brother or sister while your parents went to a PTA meeting or something, and you left your brother or sister alone so you could go out and, that would be a serious matter. It would be a mortal sin. Disobedience in small things would be a venial sin. Older children. Older children need to help around the house. And sometimes that help that the parents ask for is to take care of their siblings. How many times your parents go out and leave the teenagers in charge of the younger kids? That's normal. When the older child is put in charge by the parents, the children have to obey that older brother or sister as if they were their parents. So if your parents leave and leave your older brother and sister in charge, you have to obey them. They say you have to, it's time for bed, you can't watch that movie, you have to go do your homework, you need to clean this room. You have to obey them as if they were your parents. But you only have to obey them when your parents put them in charge. So on a day-to-day basis, just if they come into you, come up to you and say, Sally, go down to the store and get me, some shampoo. You don't have to obey them unless your parents told you to do so. Only when your parents put them in charge. Now, it's nice to be helpful to them and to keep peace in the family, and because they are your sister or brother and you love them. I know my brother used to, whenever like Mother's Day was coming or my mom's birthday, he never went shopping. He would ask my sister to go buy something for, here's some money, go down to the drugstore and buy Mom a box of candy. Of course he would pay her to do that, so she would do it. If he didn't pay her, she wouldn't have, and she wouldn't have been obliged to do it either. Even though he was her brother. He had an older brother, and he was 5 years older than she was. She didn't have to obey him. So, but when they're in charge of you, then you have to obey them. And older children need to be careful not to abuse that authority. When you are in charge of them, you need to act like your mother and your father and treat your siblings the way your parents would treat them. You standing in your parents' place, you need to act the way your parents would. Now, what happens when you grow up and you move away from home? What are your obligations then? In this day and age, a lot of kids leave the home and then they come back because they find out there in the world that it's expensive to live out there. And so, they're out of a job, they go to college and then they find out that they have a degree, but it's not any good they can't get a good job. So they move back with their parents. Do they have to obey their parents now? They have to obey their parents in everything regarding the home. But they don't have to obey their parents in things that aren't regarding the home. For example, if your parents say you have to be in at a particular time because they like to lock the house up and they go to bed at a particular time and you would disturb the house if you came in later than that, you have to obey them. If they say that they don't like a friend of yours or a girl, let's say it's a boy and she's got a girlfriend, or a girl and she's got a boyfriend and they don't like that boy or girlfriend, they can't tell you not to associate with them. But they can tell you that they don't want them in their house because it is their house. And as long as you're in their house, you have to obey the rules of the house. That means you have to obey them.
I mean, that's at age 18, right?
No, that's as long as you live in their house.
No, I mean, like whenever you don't have to like rake up the leaves.
If you're living in their house and they tell you to rake up the leaves, you break up the leaves, whether you're 25 or 30 or 45 or, you're living at home, you obey. Now, some of the other things, like, again, they can't tell you who to associate or not to associate with.
I guess that's what I mean.
Yeah, that they can't tell you. You can have your friends, but if they tell you can't bring them to the house, then you can't bring them to the house. The house is theirs. And as long as you're there, you have to respect what they want done in their house. Love and honor and respect, you owe them until they die and beyond. You can never stop honoring them and respecting them and praying for them, even after they die. One of the things also that you need to understand is that you have no right now or later, or even if you're no longer living in their home, to tell anybody anything that would be disrespectful to your parents. For example, you can't go to your girlfriend or boyfriend and say, my parents are being so unjust. They told me I had to be home at a particular time. Or, you're not allowed to do that. What goes on in the house stays in the house. That would be disrespectful. You don't complain about your parents to other people. Now, if your parents are doing something sinful, then you do need to speak to someone in authority. If you're but you don't tell your friends. If your father, for example, drinks too much and comes home drunk, you don't go out and tell that to other people. That's a family matter. Your father is entitled to respect in the world. You don't tear down your parents in front of the neighbors. And finally, everything that I've talked to you about God the Father pertains also to the Blessed Mother. She is your mother. You inherited her. She adopted you. On the cross, Christ gave you to her. When he was dying, he told St. John to take her as his mother. And again, remember this whole idea that she loves all her children equally. Parents love their children equally, but not the same. She loves all of you. She loves all of you equally. You fill the whole of her heart. She gives you as much love as you will take. But she doesn't love you all the same. And she doesn't love you the same as she loved her son. She loves you equally to him, but not the same. He needed something from her, and she gave it to him. He needed her to stand behind him as he grew up. He needed her to support him. And when the time came for him to die, he needed her to stand at the foot of the cross and support him there as well. And that's why on the cross, he gave us to her. I think she could have stopped the whole crucifixion if she had wanted to. This is just my own personal opinion. I don't think any theologian would back this up. But, Pilate was looking for an excuse to stop the crucifixion. Everything that came up, he grabbed at it. He's from Galilee, let's send him over to Herod. Oh, let's just scourge him and then let him go. He was looking for an excuse. If Our Lady had stepped forward and pleaded for him, I think he would have released him. But she didn't, because she knew that he had to die. He had been born to die, and it was her job to prepare him for his death. When he was presented in the temple, she also presented herself. She knew that this child was destined to die, and she took the sacrifice upon herself. And that's why she stood at the foot of the cross and made the sacrifice again. And then God gave us to her. And she gives each of us what we need, as much as we need in the way of love. But she loves us differently because we each are different people, and we each require something different from her. Whatever you need, you can go to her and ask her. She is your mother, but she's more than a mother. She's also a queen. Now, you can go to your mother and ask her for something, and your mother may not give it to you, not because she doesn't want to give it to you, but because she can't. Your family can't afford it. She doesn't have the power to do it. That's not the case with Our Lady. She's a queen. She has the power. There's a beautiful prayer by St. Francis de Sales. I think I wrote it down here somewhere. Yes. It goes like this. I'll put this up on the website. Remember, most sweet Virgin Mary, that you are my mother and that I am your child. That you're most powerful and I am poor, miserable, weak little being. I beg you, my sweet mother, to defend me and govern me in all that I do. Do not tell me, gracious Virgin, that you cannot, because your beloved Son gives you all power. Don't say that you must not, because you know that you are the mother of all poor human beings, and of me in particular. If you couldn't, I would excuse you, saying, it's true that she's my mother and she loves me as her son, but her poverty lacks influence and power. If you weren't my mother, I would be patient, saying, she's indeed rich enough to help me, but alas, not being my mother, she doesn't love me. So then how, sweet Virgin, since you are my mother and you are most powerful, how shall I excuse you if you don't help me and don't lend me your aid and assistance? You see, my mother, you're forced to grant all my requests. St. Francis de Sales. I like that one. I use it a lot when I want to blackmail her. Not blackmail, bribe. Bribe. So, Next time, we'll talk about the rest of the fourth commandment as it applies to civil, that is government, and church authority. The fourth commandment deals with authority, all sorts of authority. But today we covered your parents, and the role of parents to their children, and the role of children toward their parents. So if you ever have questions, you can always ask me. If you don't see me, I'm around here. If you have something you want to ask me, I'm always willing. Yes?
The problem I have with my mother is that she considered the fixed opposite from my husband. So I'm who listen.
All right. Your obligations to your mother. Right now, your obligation to your husband is the important obligation. It's the primary. Once you get married, that role takes over, and your role to your parents now is that of respect and honor, but not obedience anymore. It would be different if you were living in her house, but assume you're living with your husband, and again, I remember when I ran the orphanage in Mexico, and I had, like 30, 40 boys. And at one point, my mom, we had just come back from Guadalajara, and my mom had been talking in the car on the way back to the boys about dancing. Now, some of the boys wanted to learn how to dance. So my mom got it into her mind that she's going to teach the boys how to dance. We got home around midnight. And she said she was going to teach them right then and there. I said, Mom, they have to go to bed. She says, and she said, but I want to teach them how to dance. I said, they can learn tomorrow. I said, but tonight they have to go to bed. She says, I'm your mother, and I said that they're going to learn how to dance. And I'm their mother, and I said they're going to bed. You have to, it's your obligation now is to your husband. And so he is the one you have to obey. Your mother is secondary. So if the two clash, you have to go with what your husband says. All right. Anything else? All right. Let's say prayer.